What does it really mean to be spiritual? What kind of lifestyle or priorities or values might someone like that have? Is it about getting the house or the car we always wanted? Or about dressing in a certain way? Or about eating a certain diet even? And what happens when all that still makes you feel like something's missing? Stay tuned for the show today. Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Freedom Show with Richard Lawrence. My name is Darren Ball and this is the podcast helping you to awaken your chakras, to unlock your psychic powers and to discover true spirituality. Now in this episode I talked to Richard about a more profound spirituality, one rooted in ancient yoga wisdom and modern cosmic teachings. And today we're going to cover one simple question you can ask yourself to give you clarity and help to transform your spiritual growth. We're also going to cover a key to raising your consciousness and what you can do to awaken your chakras, to experience deeper fulfillment and to accelerate your spiritual awakening. And if there's one thing that I want you to take away from the show today, it's don't settle for the small version of your spiritual path, because your destiny is so much greater. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to hit that bell so you don't miss any future conversations between Richard and myself exploring this profound spirituality that you can make a part of your life. Richard.
Darren.
So today, this came up on a podcast I was watching recently, and it really struck me as a conversation I'd like to have with you.
Yeah.
And the sort of preamble is that there's a lot of misconceptions about what it actually means to be spiritual. I think, at least what I've observed.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people who might identify as being spiritual, but we'll talk about love and light and all this. But when it really comes down to it, they might be the first one to walk past someone in need at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a lot of people who use spiritual tools to get what they want, and they may even get that, but at the end, they don't feel fulfilled. They still feel empty. They don't feel whole. They don't feel healed, as if there's something still missing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I'd like to get into, because it just sort of, for me, raises the question of, is there something else that we can offer to the conversation here from the teaching of the 9 freedoms, for example, that would help people to appreciate a more profound spirituality that may lead them to what they really need at the end of the day and ultimately would want.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things I'd like to pick up today, and then I have some questions I'd like to kick off.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good.
But basically, there's this idea of what does spirituality really mean? How can we tell the difference between maybe what you might call like spiritual materialism and genuine spirituality? And then how can we relate this back to some of the themes that we've been talking about before, like the heart chakra and activating the heart chakra and what that brings into our life, particularly into our spiritual journey.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is I think the reason that it doesn't hit the spot for some people, they feel unfulfilled, is that it's too meager. The offering, the teaching that is being delivered from certain quarters is far too small.
Yeah.
And literally is limiting people. And even if you look at the Christian virtues, let's just call them that, and things like kindness, humility, tolerance, patience, mercy, forgiveness, and so on, these are great things. In fact, they're essential things. As a matter of fact, the more enlightened you become, the more essential they become. So I'm not taking away from them. And as Cicero said, got to get this right now, glory follows virtue like a shadow, or some quote like that. And so they are crucial, but they're not enough. They're not enough internally, they're not enough externally on their own. What you need to be doing is making the maximum difference, the greatest service in the world that you could perform. That's fulfilling. If you're really doing it. And if you're really doing it, you want to do it more. Gandhi once said, that when you really become one with God, you become restless. It's like a never-ceasing agitation, but in there lies the peace. Because you're always striving to do more for God. And so that's one thing. In other words, think big, spiritually speaking, not just materially speaking.
Totally, because that's actually a very inspiring message, because basically what we're saying there is like, why settle for something so small in comparison to what your real potential is and what spirituality is really about, actually, and what you can experience.
I mean, we've talked before that there are the different, in the old days, they would say, well, there are different paths as Raja in the yoga tradition, Jnana yoga, the yoga of devotion, the yoga of psychic development, the yoga of wisdom, the yoga of the physical practices, and the ideas of service were extremely limited. They were all framed around this idea of dharma in the ancient teachings, and it wasn't wrong. But it is quite limiting if you're just seeing, I've just got to fulfill my dharma, what I'm born into, and get all that right and so on. What we need to do is to look at the world, look at ourselves, say, what do I believe is the thing which will make the biggest difference to others that I could possibly do with my life? And for a spiritually minded person, that will be spiritual service because it's more complete. Material service is essential. Spiritual service is complete. And such a person will look for that. They'll pick the path, even if it's the one they don't like initially. One thing I'll promise you, though, if it's the right one for you, you will like it. You might say, actually, I would rather be doing this. I'd rather be in meditation. I'd rather be doing all kinds of other things. Yeah. But once you take to it, you'll know there's nothing more fulfilling than that. And that's the external. And then, of course, there's the internal, which is not to limit yourself, as so many of these teachers do. So many of these really famous teachers have a limited view of enlightenment, which is just like some peaceful state where you don't think about the future, you don't think about the past. And no. It's far more than that. That might be a staging post for some people, and a helpful one. We're not taking away from it. But the goal is limitless. Yeah. It's cosmic.
Well, that's a great word to use, actually, because as you were talking there, I was just feeling like you were peeling back the layers of limitation on these different ideas that we have about what spirituality is. Yeah. In the first case, peeling it back to, as you say, from the meager teachings that a lot of people have given. Actually, it's not about that at all, this kind of spiritual materialism and using spiritual tools to get what we want. And then even when you think about your dharma, no, it's not about that. Think unlimited about the service that you can be giving. Yeah. And in so doing, you become more unlimited yourself in the expression of...
And you can get stuck if you're not careful on, just by settling. Yeah. Saying, all right, I've reached this level, that's good enough for me. People do it psychically, and so they can get, even mediums, many mediums, I would say most mediums, settle. They say, okay, I can get, your aunt, my uncle, etc. And they might do it very well, but they don't move on to something higher than that.
Got it.
In fact, I used to do a radio show on LBC and was a psychic regularly on it, and he was getting messages of that kind of ilk that I mentioned. And he's told me, he got a message from me, and he said, your relatives on the other realms are quite disappointed that you're not channeling them more because your grandfather and
he's got something to say,
all due respect to my grandfather and relatives, but someone on a spiritual path is aspiring, and your mediumship should evolve. Just taking an example of mediumship, it should evolve. And I've experienced that it does evolve. When I first started giving readings, Dr. King, who set me up to do psychic readings, I was getting one or two guides, but they turned out, I didn't know it then, to be disciples, pupils of a higher person, a lama actually, who couldn't communicate with me at that time. In fact, he wasn't able to communicate with me directly for several years. And I'll tell you when it changed is when I was given a great initiation by Dr. King of becoming a bishop. And after that, then he could communicate with me directly.
Wow. I got shivers listening to that.
But even then, his name, I call him Lama Rinpoche. Actually, he's a very advanced Lama indeed. But even then, it had to be done by appointment. So one of the other guys who I then found out were actually his pupils, they'd come to me and say sort of, 9 p.m. on Thursday, that's how it started. It wasn't, and it would always be just after I'd either taken a service, was work, or after I'd perhaps been involved in what we call a spiritual energy radiator run, which is when spiritual energy is sent out to the world. It would be a time when I was kind of more attuned, and therefore he was even able to talk to me or communicate with me in any way. Wow. Later it evolved, and I was able to get it more regularly. Wow. So this moves on, and then you go up and you go up, and you should evolve. Doesn't mean you won't talk to others. It doesn't actually preclude. It might make it difficult, though, and it certainly happened to me as a medium, to get communications from a lower level. The strange thing. Yeah. And sometimes I'll tell you an interesting example of this. I got a communication with Dante, which we've talked about before. Now, that took me many years before I was able to do that. decades before I was able to get someone like Dante. And I had to actually be in the area where he came from, in Tuscany, before he was able to contact me.
Wow.
I didn't know I was going to Tuscany for that reason. However, but when he first communicated with me, he had somebody with him who is such a famous rock star. I don't really want to name it because it sounds very tacky, but he's very good with words. And so he was able to sort of put into words this communication and make it more colloquial, you might say, in a very good way. So he was working with him. Now, interestingly, I found out later, I didn't know at the time, that this is exactly what Dante did when he was alive. He used troubadours of the time to help him put, he was the first person, I found out later, who put his poetry into the colloquial language as opposed to, say, in Latin.
I see. So it's just reenacting what he did in life.
And he used troubadours to help him with that. So it was very interesting. Anyway, curiously enough, many years later, or after this, or some years after this, that particular rock star wanted to give me a message, and I'd moved on, and he had to then, it was conveyed the other way round by Dante, so it returned the favor.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, because I guess what I take from all that is that the question we really need to be asking ourselves is, are we evolving?
So that the point is, forget the mediumship thing, that's just an example. We are evolving all the time. And if you stand still, actually, there's a great figure, one I revere, in Vedic writings by the name of Narada Muni. And people familiar with Hindu philosophy will know that name. I'm not saying he's fully understood, but he's regarded as the king of the sages at that period of time. And we're talking about a very ancient period of time, because I think that the people who recorded it were, in my opinion, possibly reading the Akashic records, or reading into history, looking through time to a former period. So people who tell you it was 5,000 years ago, or whatever they say, are missing the point there. It's a very ancient time. Could even be late Atlantean time. Anyway, which is a previous civilization, for those not familiar with the concept of Atlantis, many thousands of years ago. Narada Muni, who I personally believe it could well be a name for what we would now call the Lord Babaji, but that's my opinion. That's not an Ethereal Society teaching or anything I'm asking people to necessarily accept, but that's what I would believe. But he made some interesting observations in a book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, which was written, they say, according to, I know Hindu scholars will dispute some things, but many say, in order to bring out two things after the Mahabharata, by the way, and after the Ramayana. Vyasa, who wrote down or delivered the Mahabharata, was told, they say, by Narada Muni to write another work which did two things. It focused on the persona more of Sri Krishna, and also it focused on service. Now, there are still many accounts of the activities of Sri Krishna in it. Many great intelligences that people have heard of appear in it, such as Rishi Maitreya, as he's called then. There's a female aspect of Rishi Maitreya as well.
Really?
Now, the Lord Maitreya, as we refer to him, well known to people who are into theosophy,
for sure, yeah.
It was regarded as being the next coming master. And you can see why, because he was so prominent. In fact, he, with the exception of the Lord Babaji, would be the number one ascended master on earth. So you could see why, and he appears in those ancient times. Actually, the cosmic plan has changed everything, and so that won't necessarily happen in that way. I've personally been privileged to come into be in the presence of the Lord Maitreya. But that's arranged by Dr. George King, by the way, not by me. But that's a whole other story.
Well, incredible story for another time.
We might come to for some other time. But coming back to Narada Muni, he said, and it's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and this is relevant to your question, there are, I'm using my words here, I don't know whether he called them masters, but very devout, advanced mystics who are doing all the austerities, the practices, strict discipline, mystical exercises, who haven't reached what we would call ascension, who haven't reached liberation, who haven't reached freedom from rebirth. Mm-hmm. And I think the implication of that, I take that to mean you've got to include service. Even then, even in those days, it's not enough. In fact, in the Upanishads, it does state, in one of them, the Ishvara Upanishad states that it's very bad just to focus on, it's dark, I think is the word.
Yeah, I remember that quote.
To focus on just on going, your inner life, so your outer life. It's even worse to focus just on your inner life. But when you focus on both, that's the perfect balance. So this person who's not unfulfilled, who's looking for spiritual fulfillment and spiritual realization, which you will get through service and through inner development. You need to, the balance could be wrong. They might be too focused on the one rather than the other. And usually it's on the inner, too focused on the inner. But if I have met people who've taken to the path, become far too focused on the exterior, forgetting to go inwards. As the master aetherists put, never forget to go inwards. And they too can get lost. So you've got to get that balance between the inner and the outer right.
It's interesting that, even going back thousands and thousands of years to those teachings, that balance is even articulated there, and that, it's just that we sort of skirt over a lot of these things,
it is
in mainstream
there.
kind of modern spirituality.
It's articulated by Sri Krishna, who said that devotional service will free you from birth and rebirth and death and so on. There should be no reincarnation on earth. There shouldn't be. There is, and we need it. But it shouldn't be necessary. On a more advanced planet, it wouldn't be necessary.
Because it'd be going in the right direction.
People think, I found out about reincarnation. That's good. It's great. I've remembered a past life. Helpful, I hope. But it's not the answer. It's not the answer, because in the end, we won't need reincarnation at all. We only have reincarnation as a corrective. It's because we can't be left to our own devices to evolve.
Because we go too far in the wrong direction.
We don't learn enough. So we have to keep stopping, reassessing, reprogramming, coming back in another life, in another form, which will force us almost, not quite force, but put us in a position where we face the lessons we're trying to avoid.
Wow, it's a deep insight.
Yeah.
That's really good. If someone was asking, well, what's actually wrong with using these spiritual tools to get the material things I want, the spiritual materialism idea? I mean, what's actually wrong with it?
It's very common, isn't it, in the so-called New Age movement, that people use spiritual tools to enhance their life. And they've got it the wrong way round, as a matter of fact. It's not exactly wrong, by the way, but the motive is always, there's one reason we're on Earth, and that's to evolve.
Oh, yeah, okay, bring it back to that theme.
If there's one thing I know, that I know.
Yeah.
And teachings put it in different ways. They use the word karma, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. They use many different ways to describe it, God's will, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But in the end, we're here to evolve. We're not here to enhance our material existence. Now, material things are necessary. They're not of themselves sins.
Yeah.
They're not of themselves, as some of the old teachings would say, delusions. They are reflections, not delusions. They're reflections of a higher life. But that's not the purpose. And some so-called, I'm going to say that, spiritual teachers skew spirituality, and that probably makes them more popular. They probably sell more books. They probably get bigger audiences. I don't know. But they do it in order to say, well, you follow this, you use yoga and it'll enhance your sex life. It'll enhance your physique. You'll be more attractive. You'll be more popular. And that's not why it was devised. It was devised, hatha yoga, to enable people to enter samadhi. That's why it was devised.
It's quite a heavy point.
Yeah. But if it helps you, though, and there's nothing wrong. I mean, it's good that people are healthy, by the way. And the natural state of things isn't suffering. The natural state of, we weren't born to suffer. That's not the purpose of life.
Yeah, I like that message.
And that those things come along. So it's not that material things are wrong. They are necessary. It's how they're used, and the very, very best way. Ultimately, the only way, but certainly the best way, is to use them in service. And if they're necessary for your life of service, then that's great. And if spiritual practices help you to do that, all the better. I mean, you won't be able to control Kundalini if you can't manage your finances. I said that before. And things like that, and one's health, and these things all have to be managed. And they are there to be managed, and they're part of the lessons of life.
Yeah.
But the goal has to be service, and the goal has to be enlightenment, and those two are one and the same, by the way. They work together on the inner and the outer planes.
Well, I think, just going back to one of your points there, essentially, like you're making a point ultimately about what are we using these things for, and what ultimately is the motive. I mean, if you're attracting financial resources to you so that you can do more to help and serve others versus attracting you for some other more selfish purpose, there's a big difference between those two.
Massive difference, yeah.
But it might be the same spiritual tools that you're using.
It might be. Could look the same.
Yeah.
Could look exactly the same. And that doesn't matter. And another thing I would say is that Narada Muni, coming back to him again, did say, and I think it's brilliant myself, I can completely understand the strategy, which is what I'm calling it. He didn't call it that. He did say in the Srimad Bhagavatam, people should, and he would call them sannyasins in those days. So they would be people who had given up material things completely. Yeah. They'd given up everything except the sort of basic sustenance of their body. They had no possessions, no attachments, no relationships, other than the fact that they may well have been with other like-minded souls in their quest for truth. They were on that path, but he told them to keep traveling. He said, never stay in a village more than one day. And these people, he said, actually, you should be bathed in ecstasy 24 hours a day. Now, that's not achievable by most people, except that when you enter a higher state of consciousness, certainly by activating the heart chakra at least to some degree, and maybe higher, then that never leaves you. You might leave it, but it doesn't leave you. There's a paradox there.
Yes,
so
I like it, yeah.
You can understand that. He says you can't, to these sannyasins, engage in any form of sense gratification. But the main message was, keep moving. And the reason, I believe, he said that, is because it was a life of service.
So even in that...
They weren't just doing it like somebody who goes off into a cave or into the wilderness to find their own enlightenment.
Yes,
they were carrying their enlightenment. They were channeling, you might say, their enlightenment in a way, certainly indirectly, to each village and spreading the light throughout the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So even in that example, it's still service actually in the way that they can perform.
I mean, we can go much further than that now, by the way. Yeah. I'm not advocating that at all. Now we can do prayer, we can do healing, we can get actively involved in maybe very material ways in service to help a great cause. As many do, for example, in the Aetherius Society. We still have to have buildings and do our accounts, and this is great form of service. It will activate the higher chakras, though, over time because of the motive behind it.
Well, let's talk more about that. Actually, that's a big part of it. I mean, when you're giving service, this kind of more profound spirituality that we're talking about.
Yeah.
How does that relate to activating the higher chakras, including the hearts, in comparison to a more mundane or meager path that you might be talking about?
To sustain a life of service, you have to have love in your heart. You start to experience peace. Let's say you start with serving others. Now, you don't really know how you're going to serve others, so you pick a way that you think, in your view, is the best way you could serve. And you do that, will start, and you have to develop yourself as well, because you need the motivating force to maintain the service. In the 9 Freedoms, which is our core book on the Spiritual Freedom Show, you have love, and then you have service. You have bravery first, actually, because you'd be brave enough to make the step, change your life, upset some people if you have to. They may not understand it. It's their problem. You're still helping them, even if they think you're not.
Yeah, that's good confidence that you can take there, I think.
You've got to have that bravery. But you need the love to generate your own life of service. So when you do that, because that's you're being driven by that motivating force, although you might be doing a very mundane task, you're concentrating with the conscious mind, not the superconscious mind maybe, to work out this, that, and the other. It might be quite risky to sort of enter a trance state while you're trying to repair a building. I don't recommend it. So but they see all these aspects of mind are there to be used.
Yeah.
Whereas in the old days, they'd say sort of, and these mystics, perhaps that Narada Muni was talking about, where they were probably doing away with those basic aspects of thought. No, you need them. You need to come back to them. You need to use your conscious mind, but it will be directed by higher mind. You know, they would say in some ancient writings, sattvic mind. Higher.
What does that mean?
Well, they had a concept of three things. They had the sort of, which they didn't, I think they didn't fully understand some of them, by the way, but the more passive approach, which is called tamas, the more active approach, which is called rajas, and then, if you like, the spiritual approach, which is a fusion of the two and above the other two, but they all come together, they all have their place, and that's the sattvic approach. So that's why, that's what I think Narada Muni would be driving at when he said have just 24 hours a day, have ecstasy in your hearts, because he's talking about higher consciousness driving you while you serve. Now, what goes around comes around, it's karma, and you're putting out positive energy based on the difference you make. I mean, you might have a really testing decision to make, and you might have to sit down and make a judgment. Now, if you are able to follow your intuition, because you've developed your intuition internally, then you'll make better judgments.
Yeah.
I mean, just to give a recent example, this year, we were sending out a lot of prayer energy for a particular situation to do with some peace negotiations. Now, we didn't know the time of those negotiations because it hadn't been revealed. So we had to pick a time to do it ahead of time. We picked a time which was actually 1 p.m. When it was announced that this would take place at 1 p.m. Now, some because that's a coincidence. I don't believe it was. If you're able to be guided by your higher faculties in your everyday life, as it were, you'll make the right judgments. You won't waste so much time. You won't go down blind alleys. You'll be a better judge of people and many, many other things. So these two work together. But coming to your question, when you're engaging in material activities in order to serve others, all the time, because of the motive, the driving force of love, hopefully you're following your intuition while you do it, you are listening to your conscience. You should venerate conscience. It's very misunderstood. We'll probably talk about that another time, but it's not necessarily guilt. There can be quite a difference between those two things, but your conscience, because you're doing all these things, you must activate your higher chakras, and even if it can't manifest at that time because you're in a precarious position trying to prop a beam up in a building or something, it will manifest sooner or later.
Yeah, I think there's a really nice thread that you've drawn out there. I mean, there's this motive of selflessness which manifests in sort of, we might use the same tools, but they're for the sake of others and helping others. And in this service to others, we are activating our higher chakras, and there are these amazing rewards that are there of being in contact with your intuition and being able to use that of these deeper states, more profound bliss states that you've talked about, and ultimately enlightenment as a goal.
Yeah. And it's always been there from the most ancient teachings, but far more in the modern teachings, far more in the 9 freedoms and the 12 blessings and other teachings of this period than ever before, because it's far more important. And we can do far more than we ever could before. And that's why it's all changed. There's far more energy available to us now than there was in those days. So everything's changed in that regard. And there's far more at stake as well.
I think, if we go back to sort of the premise of the show of people kind of manifesting in these vision board, all that affirmation. I mean, these are spiritual tools that if we just reorient the motive, with an unselfish motive towards how can we be using these to help others in their evolution, ultimately our own. Then it's just a small shift that can really open the doors to an amazing spiritual future for us and spiritual evolution.
And we see no division between the outer and the inner. Both have to be managed. Both are essential. And sometimes you could get one out of balance from the other, and then you need to rectify it, which you can, and get yourself back on track again.
Yeah. No, I think that's that's very it's very simple guidance at the end of the day, but it's just and quite easy to apply, and it's just a little course correction that could open the doors to
and
something.
Don't limit yourself.
And I think that's the key message at the end of the day. Yeah. When you peel back these limitations, as you were talking about, you start to realize what you could really experience, and that it's so much more than the meager promise actually that was there.
I mean, we've had people come to the Aetherius Society, for example, who've been at another path, and that other path, and I won't name one that came up recently, isn't really bad. In fact, it's a lot of good philosophy. But the person thought, but actually, they're telling me this, they're telling me that. That makes sense. That all answers that question and this question. But what are they actually doing? What am I doing as a result of this? What are they enabling me to do for the world?
Yeah.
What are they enabling me to do for my own enlightenment? Other than thinking some interesting and useful thoughts. And they thought, that's a deadener, that's limiting me, and they've moved on to something much greater.
Yeah, I'd like to finish on that point, because I think that's the answer there, isn't it? It's like, what are we actually doing which is genuinely spiritual, which is genuinely this service to others. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
There's 3 takeaways that I'd like to offer you from the show today. The first is don't settle. Think bigger spiritually. And by that I mean don't settle for tired platitudes and shallow spiritual goals. True spirituality is about striving for the most profound form of service that we can offer. It's about asking ourselves, what is the greatest good that I can do with this life? Because that's where the transformation and the fulfillment and the advancement really lies. The second thing is about the purpose of our evolution and having real clarity about that, about understanding what life is about. We're here to evolve, not just to manifest petty material desires. And the spiritual practices we do and that we use are valuable in that they help us in our spiritual advancement so that we can do more to serve others. And we can use that as a yardstick so that we do not get distracted by so much other noise that is out there. And the final point I'd like to leave you with is that genuine, selfless service leads to real transformation. Serving others isn't just something noble that we can do. It actually changes you. It transforms you. It's the mechanism by which we can evolve, because that's the mechanism by which we can become more like God. More like the natural expression of the universe, which is this love and service to others. It's about awakening your chakras. Service awakens your chakras. It's what leads to this natural arising of Kundalini. It's not something that we do when we are enlightened. It's something that we do to become enlightened as well. And it's what allows that enlightenment to begin to blossom within you. Now, if you enjoyed that episode about spirituality, be sure to check out this episode over here about supercharging your spiritual evolution, or this episode over here about reconnecting with your higher self. Thanks for tuning into the show. We'll see you next time.